Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another week of the InnerFight Podcast. I do hope you are enjoying the 5 Minute Monday shows. We finished up with a load of practical advice with Milos, then got into something that I recorded in Tanzania, and now we're going through a series of 4 shows with Andy, who's serving up some pretty decent advice. This guy seems to know things. I've actually recorded all 4 of those shows in advance, so they're all done. This week, we're talking about quick wins, something different next week and the week after. Hopefully, you're enjoying it. If you haven't checked out 5 Minute Mondays, please do it. And if you haven't checked us out on YouTube, please do that as well. There's loads of parts of a main show like this one, which are cut up smaller, more digestible, shorter to match some people's attention span and some of the important outtakes, and as well as the whole show. So if you want to get more of a feel for the guest, then, which I always I always feel kind of tells the story a bit better when I can see their face, their emotions, and their lips and their eyes moving around, then please do go and check out the show over on YouTube. If you like it, then subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you really like it, or if you really want us to like you, leave a comment or share it with a friend. This week, we are talking all about depression and addiction, or addiction and depression. I've had this argument or this thought in my mind for a long time with myself. Which comes first? Are they intricately linked? What really is one without the other, or the other without the other? How does it really work? Are we born with addiction? Do we learn addiction? Are we born with depression, or does something spark depression? I've reached out to a group that I'm in, and someone kindly came forward and said, I've suffered with addiction and depression, and I'd be more than happy to talk about it. My guest today is Dan Beaumont. For a number of years, in a number of different situations, Dan has been incredibly successful in his life. However, as he tells us in the show, he was brought up in a household which was not full, but highly populated with addiction. That addiction is passed through various generations and also went into him. He has suffered with 2 different major bouts of depression and is now on a journey to help others talk about and deal with these 2 quite, as he says in the show, normal things that can happen in people's life. This week's announcements, to be totally honest with you, are mainly interesting for the ladies, which should be interesting for guys as well, because guys, you may have a lady that you believe should get stronger, fitter, faster, or you would like to, or you know one that would like to. So what do we have for you? We have ladies only strengths. Boz has been running these groups for some time now. She also does pre and postpartum, which is developed into ladies only strength groups. They run mornings. They also are starting to run in the evenings as well. So if you're a female and you prefer to do strength training, which I believe all females as well as males should be doing, but you prefer to do it with a group of like-minded females, then this is where you need to be. Give Boz a shout, cb@innerfight.com. She has also been very busy outside of the gym, where she now has a Wednesday morning ladies cycling group. They leave from the bottom of the stick at Al Qudra at 6 a.m. It is open to anyone, all abilities. There is no charge, she tells me. It's just ladies having a nice ride. 2 announcements for the ladies. Guys, if you're listening, please do share them with the ladies. That's it for this week's announcements. This is episode number 834 of the InnerFight Podcast. Addiction and Depression with Dan. Enjoy the show. Folks, welcome back to the show and welcome to Dan. Dan, I massively appreciate you agreeing to talk about this subject with us. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing well, and thank you for letting me come on the show as well. It's 8 a.m. here in England, in cold England at the moment. So thank you for letting me come on the show.
Mate, I want to jump right in at the deep end. When you think, or when you used to think about addiction, what came into your mind?
Addiction. It's a big topic, especially in my family as well. The first thing that comes to my mind when I think about addiction is compulsive behavior. that leads to destructive consequences. In my life, there have been many obvious kind of things to do with addiction, but it's the more subtle ones. And the first example that comes to my mind is sugar. But I would say addiction in my mind is anything that is any kind of action or behavior that leads to destructive consequences. Yeah.
I guess I was going to save this one for later. What comes first though? Addiction or depression, or is there an order? Because we often hear these talked about in the same sort of sentence, sometimes on the same page. How do you see them sitting?
So I can only speak from my experience again, but usually, because I've experienced a couple of bouts of depression in my life, a couple of serious bouts of depression, and the depression has sometimes led to addictive behaviors. So I'd say on that side of the coin, they're related. On the other side of the coin, I've addiction leading to depression. I'd say that hasn't been the case in my life so far, but I've definitely experienced that in close proximity with my father, for example, who struggled with, addiction to alcohol for many years as a kind of consequence of maybe low mood depression. So I would say that they are linked, but they can also come very, very separate as well. Like somebody can easily be depressed and then not engage in the addictive tendencies. I certainly remember when I was depressed in 2021 on the back of coming home from living abroad for 6 years, this kind of like depersonalization. I was running a business in Romania, a hostel and charity, and then COVID hit and sunk those businesses. And I came home to the UK and I was just like, what the hell is all of this? Like, how do I even fit in here after 8 years of living abroad? So I experienced all of this kind of depersonalization and trying to find my place in the UK. And it led to full on depression. I was living in London at the time, no proximity to nature or anything like that. And I can only speak for how I felt during that time and whether did it lead to kind of addictive tendencies? No, not in that circumstance. I actually retreated from life. I became very low mood. I retreated from my friends and all the pleasurable things that I do in my life. I kind of went into my little cave, and that would mean sleeping, extended hours, not really feeling like I wanted to do anything with my life. Those things that were pleasurable, running, nature, all of that just went out of the window. And then coping mechanism became just simply doing nothing. So those addictive tendencies, such as and even on the positive side, running and all of this that I would do to stay healthy, kind of fell out of the window. So I think it's a lot more complex than kind of like one leading to the other or the other leading to the other. So yeah.
That's good, mate, because if you'd have said the other way around, then we'd have struggled for things to talk about for the next 40 minutes. But now that you framed it like that, we've got so much to talk about. Where can we start? I want to start by a couple of things that you said there. And I think we're going to jump around a bit here because I've got things from childhood, but I've also got this great example that maybe resonates with a lot of people that's quite fresh. 2020, 2021, you lost some businesses, you moved back to the UK. Now you said two things there that I think a lot of listeners will pick up on. You retreated from nature and you also stopped doing running. You stopped running, which was something that you knew brought you a lot of satisfaction. Were you conscious of those things, mate? Did you consciously say, I'm just too depressed to go out and do it? Or can you talk us through maybe how that transpired?
Yeah, I can picture myself in that room in that moment when I was thinking about this at the time. They just feel insurmountable. They feel so difficult to do. And people who have gone through depression will understand that. Like an ordinary 5K run that does take a little bit of, kind of effort to get on your shoes, to get out. There is always resistance there. Even now when I'm in a good headspace, like I procrastinate with the running, even though I should be running 100K a week. I procrastinate and it's hard to do, but it just feels 100 times harder when when you're depressed. And there's no kind of, it's really difficult to explain, but even going to the supermarket feels like a massive chore and you just don't want to do it. You just don't want to do it. There's something in your head that says, no, not today. Let's just sit in bed. And there was all of this kind of reasoning with myself. I was like, okay, I can stay in bed for another half an hour. It won't hurt. The day's still young. It's 12 o'clock in the afternoon. But those tasks and those pleasurable things in life just don't seem pleasurable anymore. And that's the really difficult thing to explain to people that maybe haven't been depressed before, because they're like, well, just get up, get up, and shake it off. And and I was one of those people before before I experienced my first couple of bouts of depression, because I always felt like, why can't they just, get up and get moving and stuff? It's not, when you go through it, and me being a very motivated person, when I'm not depressed, I've experienced firsthand how it feels. And it's just difficult to do those things. They just don't seem enjoyable. They don't seem like they're going to bring any joy. All you want to do in that moment is retreat and rest and relax. And I think that's maybe the body's survival mechanism. Yeah. It's like, okay, you're depressed at this moment in time. We're not going to get better by activity. We're going to get better by relaxing and accepting that this is the moment. So for me, running's probably an extreme example, but even simple stuff like showering or going to the shops became, really difficult. I often said to my friend as well, like, more difficult than running a marathon. Like the kind of activation energy or whatever that I needed to go to the shop when I was depressed was more difficult than running a marathon, just because of my mindset at that moment in time. And again, people who haven't been depressed will probably listen to that and think, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. But you're in a completely different headspace when you're depressed.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think you're absolutely right, mate. We've probably got, I don't know what percentage, but for a lot of people, they're just, how can this be? And I think, mate, as like I coach a lot of people, and I think if you'd have said to me 5 years ago, I'd have had exactly the same approach. I'd be like, come on, Dan, just get up. Let's just go for a walk. It can't be that hard. Like, I'm not asking you to, let's stay on the running theme because it resonates with you and with and probably with a load of listeners as well. But it's not like we're asking you to go out and PB your marathon, in the rational mind for the person that hasn't suffered from depression. But you're sat there and you're like, that's actually, just to get up is way harder than like you said, mate, I'd rather go and try and PB my marathon in that moment. It must be like a crazy sort of place of absolute conflict in the mind, though, or isn't it?
It massively is. And like, it feels like you're summiting a mountain, like, and what I learned very quickly, and I didn't do this the first time, when I struggled with depression for the first time, I fought it, and that's a bad strategy. You're not gonna overcome depression by trying to fight it. I learned the second time round that it's a signal from the body that something needs to change. and it's a signal from the body that you just need to chill out and relax and rest. I hadn't done that in my life. I'm 32 now, and a couple of years ago when I experienced my bout of depression, I hadn't relaxed for the first 32 years of my life. I've just been work, go. That's probably my addiction, is work. Yeah. And still I struggle with that today. But my kind of attitude towards depression the first time round was, okay, let's get a strategy for this. Let's create kind of a game plan to get through this. Yeah. And it was just, it's totally not what the body needs. You can't perform at the level that you perform at when you're normal, when your head's in a good space. So like creating strategies and all of these kind of things and action lists and to-do lists, and I'll do this and that and I'll get up and I'll run for 30 minutes, just doesn't work. My depression was a signal from the body that I needed to relax, a signal from the body that I needed to chill out and rest and meditate and be okay with doing nothing, which is bloody hard for somebody that loves working all the time. So that's the signal that I got, and then I started to change my ways in that direction, rather than fighting it, rather than trying to summit that mountain, and just being like, no, this is what the body needs. It needs to chill at this moment in time. And I started to get better.
Do you go through, is there a lot at the start, mate, of almost like the sort of what's defined as the first stage of grief, denial, like I'm not in this. So you do have this constant war of your body and your mind, because it's all one, is saying, Dan, relax, chill the fuck out, mate. You've been going like accelerator to the floor all your life, but you're like, no, I'm not doing that, because I know that I don't have to do that. So there's this massive, you're denying that anything's wrong from the get-go.
You're in conflict for sure. Yeah. Like the only strategy I knew at that moment in time was to do more. And you just can't do more. Like the body says no. That's the point here. That the mind's saying, like, here are the ways that I know to deal with this, which are go running, eat salmon, all of these little things that you read on the internet of like, almost like there's a strategy to get through it. But my body was saying no. And every time I do those things, it was like nothing brought me joy at all. I just wanted to melt in my bed. And if you knew me, I'm a really active person. Like I'm always on the go. I'm always running. I'm always moving. I'm always doing something. But in that moment, my body just didn't want that. But it was a really, really, both of the bouts of depression that I've had in my life were really, really profound learning experiences. And now being in a good place in, July 2023, I can say that I'm grateful for those experiences, because they've allowed me to realign myself at what I consider to be a higher consciousness and better understanding and awareness of myself.
Maybe we'll come back to a couple of those tools, mate, but I want to skip back to something that you said very early in the show, which was you were brought up in a household of addiction. Do you want to talk us through a little bit of that? And have you linked any of that to sort of how your personality was shaped, and therefore how you got into a state of depression? Or is it still a little bit, is it difficult, or aren't there links, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm training to become a psychotherapist, and I'm in therapy, so I've explored a lot of this, although it's a constant journey, and like I still know very little about myself, even 4 years into therapy. So yeah, as you mentioned, that's correct. Like I grew up in a household where my dad struggled with alcohol pretty much since he was 16. He's now 62, and he struggled with alcohol for a significant portion of his adult life. And I was around that as a kid. And I just remember, seeing him out of it in the back garden, asleep in the wheelbarrow, and just really, reliant on this substance that impacts a lot of people in the world. That led to my mum's marriage, and with him breaking down and him leaving, and essentially him being vacant for a large part of my upbringing. And my mum bringing us up by herself. But when he was there, he was amazing. Like he was the one that used to take us on the mountains. He's a big hiker himself, and we come from a hiking background and a family that love movement and nature. So when he was there, he was amazing. But alcohol sadly has controlled his life to a certain degree, and that's how I grew up. So I grew up with maybe kind of a lot of anger and resentment towards my father. And I started drinking when I was 12. And so that's a young age in Britain, but it's pretty normal actually in the north of Britain. I grew up on a council estate. That's what you do at 12, like on the weekends after school. And, I had a group of mates, and I'd rob booze from my mum's shed and stuff like that. Like typical stuff that a 12-year-old would do. And then we'd go down to the park and drink and stuff like that. But I remember vividly kind of that alcohol, although it felt good to be drunk and, around my mates and stuff like that, I remember the first drink that I ever had, and I didn't like the taste of it. And this is a really important arc in the story, and that later, because I essentially, like a northern person, a typical northern person, drank every weekend, binge drink. I'd either be, sick in the club, or I'd be, happy, or sometimes I even got into fights, and there was a lot of, anger and resentment there around my father. But it just didn't bring out the best side of me. And long story, very short, I drank until my early 20s, until a few big changes in my life. Number one was going to university and just being around completely different people. And then number two was traveling, where I met somebody who didn't drink. So long story short, after years of, social drinking just to fit in, and, because everybody else was doing that in the north of England, and you're coming up in the world when you're a teenager, you want to be liked, you want to be accepted, all of those things. So what do? I do what my mates do and drink on the weekend, even though I didn't like it. But essentially at 24, when I met this particular person in Nepal, when I was trekking the Himalayas, and so I was like, wow, you can have a life without drinking. I quit from one day to the next, and I haven't touched alcohol for 8 years now, and it's single-handedly the best decision of my life, because really that's the story of addiction on the Beaumont side of my family. On my dad's side of the family, his brother unfortunately died very young, 49, 50, of alcohol poisoning, struggled his whole life. And then it skipped a generation with my dad's mum and dad, but then their granddad struggled and stuff. So it's an evident theme in that side of the family. And then on my mum's side as well, her dad struggled to a certain degree as well. So it was a very, very good decision that I quit. And one of my good friends said it best. He was like, Dan, you might have just stamped out 600 years of addiction right there. Maybe not for my children or for the people, for my, future kids or whatever. But for me, I have a really positive relationship with alcohol now. And it's also enabled me to rekindle my relationship with my dad, who still struggles to this day with alcohol. I have a very different perspective on addiction now and alcohol, his alcohol.
Do you talk to him about it, mate?
Oh yeah, lots. I back in 2016, when I was struggling with my depression, one of the things I did was to help myself was go on a walk. And I walked across Spain on the Camino de Santiago. So it's 1,000 kilometers over 30 days. And in that journey, I fought a lot and I wrote a lot. And one of the things was that I wanted to rekindle my relationship with my dad after, being resentful and angry to him for many years during my teenage years. And after that journey, I reached out to him and was just like, look, I love you, man. And I want to hear your perspective, because I'd just been trying to change him my whole life. Been like, no, you shouldn't drink. You should be like this. But no, that's his story and that's his journey. And then when I actually, took time to listen to him and to hear why he drank and why and what his reasonings were and what it brought him, I understood why he needed it. And maybe my perspective on whether he should quit or shouldn't quit has changed now to a degree. I don't believe he should quit at this point. It's too far in.
Is that hard for you as his son, mate, after what you've done and what you've been through? How do you make peace with the fact that you see and you've seen for so long, and you've seen the impact of your dad's addiction on him and on you and on those around you, but now you've almost just had to accept it and let it go?
I think for many years I was just embarrassed. That was the key feeling. Like I never wanted to introduce my mates to him because I didn't know how he would be, whether he would be out of it, because when you're a kid, you want role models in your life. And I didn't really have that with my father. Well, I didn't see his good qualities because I just saw addicted alcoholic. But I actually have a really peaceful relationship with him now, in that we get on, we laugh like crazy. We're like kids. He's more like a mate, which is good. And when we ring him, it's always a jokey phone call and stuff. But I've accepted his alcoholism. I'm not trying to change him anymore because I realized that I can't change him, and you can't change people. You can inspire by action. And interestingly, me quitting has inspired him to cut down. So last year of a year, he did 200 days without alcohol, which is pretty damn impressive. Wow. When you look at that. He's been drinking for nearly 40 years.
Yeah, that's very cool.
And I didn't tell him once to do it or anything. He just saw me not drinking and living life and having fun and all of that and living a good life and doing good stuff. And he was like, I'm going to quit. So he created this little rule to himself where his first rule was that he would only drink at 5:27 every day. So he has this weird little ritual that he'd only drink, if he drinks, he'd only drink at 5:27, which I find hilarious.
That's awesome.
So he's not like a morning alcoholic drinker or anything like that. So he has that under control very well now, apart from if he comes and visits me. He's in holiday mode if he comes and visits me. And then the second thing he did, he said he wouldn't drink on a weekend. So Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Wow. That's 3 days there. And that equated to, the 200 days over a year or whatever it is. I don't know, 4 days or whatever he did.
Wow.
And he managed, 200 days in a year of not drinking, which when you look at the long arc of a year, that's really impressive.
Yeah, it's cool.
That's really, really impressive. And that was, and that really made me realize, I was like, I've been trying to change him my whole life.
Yeah.
Until before I walked the Camino, and then I just let him get on with it and didn't hit him with words every time he was like drinking. He started sharing with me. He started sharing his, why he did it. Opposed to my sister, and I hope she's not listening to this, she just gives him a hard time still. And he doesn't tell her that he drinks and stuff, and he hides it and stuff like that. And he doesn't do that with me anymore, which is why we have this interesting relationship. He's like, oh, Dan, I dropped the ball today. I ended up drinking this morning and whatever it is and stuff. He doesn't have a problem sharing with me, who's the person who doesn't drink.
Yeah.
And he doesn't lie about it anymore or like try and hide it. So I think we've progressed. I think we've progressed massively in the relationship.
But that's probably a massive testament to how you're handling it, mate, because, and this is not to insult anyone out there who's quit alcohol, but I find a lot of people that have quit alcohol are constantly trying to sort of push the same thing onto others. And, you know, for sure, you could talk very, very positively and you could sell sobriety to us. However, I think like you said with your dad, once you came to peace and accepted that he's going to go his way and you're going to support him the best you can, the whole table started to turn rather than I quit, you're all dickheads, you know, follow me sort of thing. And I see that a lot because also, I mean, I don't speak a lot on the show about alcohol and I don't speak a lot on my social media about alcohol, but I generally think that there's sort of 2 or 3 zones for people, isn't there? There's those that just can't have it because it just leads to bad things and they can try many things and they just need to not have it, you know, and it's like many things in life. Then there's those that sort of sit in the middle, you know, that can use alcohol in a, I don't know, mate, if it's a positive way or, you know, just they can use it in moderation and it's never a big deal if they have it, if they don't have it, you know, and then there's kind of the others that are not really too sure. They might go on sort of big benders once a year and then not have it for 300 days. And it's just like, you know, so we're in this area, but I do, and maybe you've got some thoughts on it there. I do find that there is an increasing number of people, which is great, that have been more vocal about stopping alcohol, but they then try and sort of ram it down people's throats. And I've never felt so good, and this is amazing, and you should try it, and all this. But you seem so much more. I guess you said it, mate. Walking 1,000 Ks on the Camino way. I know a couple of people have done it. There's a lot of time to think about how you're going to handle this. And you've come to this almost beautiful state, mate, where you know how to handle it with your dad and maybe you do it with your friends as well. I don't know. Have you got some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I historically I would try and be the guy who changed people or whatever. But now I realize you can't change people. What's right for me is not right for you. Like you've had, you know, unique experiences in your life. So like, I know nothing about your life. So who am I to come and tell you what you should do? So the only thing that you can do, that we can do, is inspire by action. Like, and you don't need to do anything. You don't need to try and change people. And it just doesn't, I find it doesn't land well with me when people tell me what to do. I just don't enjoy it. And I'm cheeky and I resist. I start poking and I'm like, no, I want to do the opposite.
Of course.
Like,
but we're all like that, aren't we? I mean, or 90% of us are like, you know, don't touch the fire. You put your hand in it.
Who likes being told what to do? Like,
nobody.
Like my mum would say one thing and then I'd do the opposite, like just to annoy her when I was younger. Cheeky, and that's part of my personality and I love it. So I think I've realized now that I can't change people and it's not my duty to, and I don't want to as well. So I inspire by action, and that's kind of the philosophy that I go on. And as soon as I did that with my father, everything changed in a really positive direction. And yeah, I don't like seeing it as well, really. If it's this I'm better than you kind of attitude when you say that, like, oh, look, I'm doing this and you should be doing this as well. It implies that like that I know something you don't know, and maybe and I don't like that the kind of tone of that. No. So I wouldn't do it to somebody else now. And I actually go around. My narrative on alcohol now might surprise a few people because I genuinely don't think it's a good idea for my dad to quit. I think it in controlled moderation, in his moderation, which is, you know, these ideas of 527, only drinking at 527 and, you know, 3-4 days off it and only drinking in the evening a couple of cans or a bit of red wine. I actually think that helps him. And I can give a very good example about this, because one of the rituals of my dad is that he hikes a hell of a lot. He loves mountains. He loves climbing. Noggin is a drink in England. Noggin means like just a little, a little swift one. He treats himself to a drink. And I always think about that as an example, because I'm like, well, that little drink or whatever, just one, he never goes past that, gets him up the mountain. Like literally gets him up the mountain. That's his motivation for going up the mountain. The view at the top and a drink is such a ritual for him. And so I thought about it, and I was like, what if he didn't have any alcohol? Like, what if he went cold turkey? Then would he have the motivation to go up the mountain? I don't know, maybe, but probably not. Like, I think it's a big part of his life, and not to mention the biological impact of, going cold turkey if you've been drinking for that long as well. So I think like the way he's got it now, the way he deals with his alcohol now is healthy, apart from when he goes on holiday and comes and visits me, which is quite hard to deal with, like, because he sees it as a holiday, and then like all of his rules go out of the window and stuff like that. But when he's at home, at his house, he's got his rituals, and these rituals really help him. So going back to your question, my perspective on, alcohol, should you quit? Maybe not. I don't know. That I know people in my life who have good relationships with alcohol, because it's not the substance, it's the attitude towards the substance.
Yeah.
And this is what, it wasn't good for me, but it might be okay for you. Like, it might be okay to drink, 3 pints a week or whatever. That's not good for me and my makeup and all of that. So yeah.
One thing you've said a few times now, Dan, and which I've obviously also found out about you, you are taking action to inspire people, and you've done some pretty cool things to help others, mate. And you're also massively involved in, I don't know if it's right, because you work a lot with Nick Butter, who's obviously incredibly well known for his exploits. I'm not sure if they should overshadow yours, mate, but you've done some amazing things. You cycled 10,000 Ks around the UK for it's an organization, Mind Over Mountain. Talk to us a little bit about some of the stuff you've done, mate, and building on that theme of inspiring people through your actions, because you are absolutely no slouch yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I was just giggling to myself because I was thinking, is that an addiction in itself as well?
Well, I was going to ask you before, actually, when you said when you quit alcohol in 2015. What did I take up? But maybe we're going to get there in the next few minutes. Let's see.
Yeah, no, like it probably is what I substituted, kind of like that. I have an addictive personality for sure. And I mean, to do these kind of things, like, you have to be quite obsessive. And I think that's part of an addictive personality. So I've always loved nature, and running, moving, cycling, hiking. I come from a family of that as well. I grew up in the beautiful Lake District, and we were out on the fells as kids, and that's really prevailed through my life. And when I quit alcohol, I started doing various charity things, and that was the first thing that I did was the walks, the Camino. So I've walked about 5,000 kilometers across Spain. I just love it. I love it. Wow. Like yeah. And then the next big thing was the 10,000 kilometer bike trip around the UK. That was kind of a homecoming tour when I moved back to the UK. And that was brilliant because I got to meet people from all walks of life. And I think the word that summed up that journey was kindness. Like, there was just so many brilliant people that I met on that trip who helped me, who invited me into their home. And we ended up raising £8,000 for Mind Over Mountains, who do incredible work for people who are struggling with depression and addiction and other mental health issues, by taking them onto the mountains for walks with therapists and counselors there to guide that. And it's just that combination of counseling and walking that's just really magical. And now recently I'm doing the big 4 rounds of the UK, which is tough, much tougher than the 10,000 kilometer bike trip. So basically there's in England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, there's these 100K classic round routes that were made famous by these famous fell runners who lived in each of these countries, that broadly kind of outlines the UK. And each of them are 100K and about 8,500 meters of elevation gain. And the challenges and the mountain runs as well. So, and the challenge is to do each of those in less than 24 hours, which is, they're bloody difficult. It's not easy stuff. And having only come into fell running 8 months ago, this is a hell of a challenge. Like, because historically I've just been a casual runner. I played football when I was growing up, so I ran to stay fit, maybe 40, 50K a week, 10Ks here and there, never more than a half marathon. So I've completely upped my running in the last 8 months, to the point of like as hard as it gets in fell running, really, in mountain running for 100K anyways, with the elevation and the weather and the navigation that you need for these routes that I'm doing this year.
It's incredible, mate. It seems like a lot of what you do is, and as you said, you're studying as well. A lot of what you're doing is inspired by your past to help people in the future who were perhaps have been through addiction, which you identified, through depression, which you've been through twice. Do you feel that I think you touched on it a little bit earlier, mate, they're almost stages of your life that have, I guess, almost provided your calling for what you're going to do? Because everything that I could sort of find about you online, which is sometimes a little bit dangerous and sometimes a little bit presumptuous, but most things are all sort of into helping others, which is absolutely incredible, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, like I think this is true to say that like your pain can be your purpose. And when you were talking then, I was thinking about Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Such a great book. And it's this idea that suffering can down us. It can make us suffer, but could there be opportunity in our suffering? Could there be purpose? Could there be opportunity to help other people? And I think I've just found that depression is a natural part of life, and so is addiction. Like we're all on a scale of addiction, in my opinion. Some more than others for certain things.
Totally.
I could think of 5 or 6 different examples of how I'm addicted at this moment in time. And you probably could as well.
100%, mate.
It's such a normal part of life. And I think I realized this now, and that I've come to terms with the idea that okay, if life is about suffering, and I say this in an optimistic way, if we're going to suffer, how can I make the best of that? And that's really the key thing. Cause you can't live a life without suffering. You're gonna, people are going to die. People are going to let you down. Stuff's going to go wrong in your body. So honestly, how can you make the most of this? Cause the other way is miserable. And I've been there as well. The other way of just, I don't want to say succumbing to the suffering. Succumbing is probably not the best word, but just thinking that that's the only way is only going to lead to more suffering. So it's okay, if I'm going to deal with these things, if I'm going to deal with, alcohol and depression and stuff like that, how can I use this to help other people? If it's a natural part of life. And I think that's made me stronger as well, because I don't resist it anymore. And I understand that I'm not abnormal by going through these things, and that actually it's a shared struggle that we're going through. And I've realized that by training to become a psychotherapist, because the more I speak to people and the more I help people and speak about their issues, I'm actually, we're all pretty normal. We're all struggling with the same things, just different contexts. So the more I the more I go through the world, that the more I try to vocalize what I'm struggling with, because I know that I've never met somebody who doesn't have their own fair share of struggles. And because that's how life is, like, and that is not pessimistic at all. That's optimistic, because you can do a lot with that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, mate. And it's a lot of awareness around feelings. And when we create awareness around a feeling, we can actually leverage that feeling as almost as a superpower, rather than trying to block it off and always think of it as a negative. We can just embrace it and we can understand it. And it can, as it's done for you, it can lift us up in so many ways.
Exactly. And I think that's the only way, really. If you've got it in your family, if you're struggling with it yourself, it's such an internal thing. But think about, like, how can I be of service to others? How can I help other people who might be struggling with this? Because that was the first thing that helped me. Depression makes you massively inwards. You're always focusing on yourself when you're depressed. Like, and like the step out of depression was A, talking about it, and then B, helping others who are struggling with it. So that's when I started work at Talk Club, which is here. Yeah. Talk Club, the men's mental health charity that I work for, who are doing amazing stuff to help men speak up about their struggles, because in England and maybe in Australia as well, men have a pretty hard time about talking about their feelings and what they're going through. Whereas, when would you see, a bunch of men at a cafe sat around a table talking about their feelings? We like to talk about, stuff like football and music and all of that kind of stuff. And, quite, I don't want to say superficial things, but like base layer things. But do we often speak about our emotions? Not really. So I wanted to try and help men speak up about what's actually going on for them, because it's by speaking that we can externalize what's internal.
It's a really interesting point, Dan, but I think it also goes back to maybe what we were saying about how addiction was perhaps passed and it skipped a generation in your case, but then it hit you with alcohol as well as it hit your dad. I think we've been trained. You're a little bit younger than I am. I'm 44, but I never had those conversations, even at school. I went to boarding school in the UK, and we were never asked sort of how we felt. So maybe it's generational, and it needs shows like this, I guess. We'll hold our hand up that we've done something good today, and it needs organizations like you're a big part of, Talk Club, and there's so many different, I remember there's a run one as well, Run Talk Run, which is which is just amazing. And I think as maybe you've got some thoughts on this, mate. I think my personal opinion is it needs time, and yes, we're making good steps forward, but I think we need to be, it's like training for a marathon. Yes, you can train for a marathon in 2 months, but will your marathon be the best marathon of your life? Well, it will be at that stage, but it won't be maybe what your potential is. Whereas if we get you for 9 or 10 months to train for that marathon, we're probably going to get a better result. So the talks that men are having, I think we should be okay that they start slowly and they progress slowly, because we need to train the subconscious to know what the fuck we're doing, because we haven't done it for so many years, basically, right?
It's so true. And there's something that really needs to be trained, and that's giving men the language to be able to speak about what they're feeling. A lot of men don't know how to explain what they're going through. Like I did, like, until I started therapy, until I started training to become a psychotherapist, I used very limited language to explain what I was going through. I'm sad, happy, angry, excited. There's 4 words or whatever, trying to explain, the complexity of what you're actually feeling. It's a language issue. And when you get men in a room together speaking about what they're actually going through, slowly but surely, like, they start developing better ways to communicate what they're actually going through. Because I didn't ever consider that was an issue, that that like, if you can't articulate what you're feeling, then you're just not going to talk about what you're feeling, are you? But you're totally right. If you grow up in the English schooling system, I didn't get taught, what does anger mean? What are the shades of anger? What are the shades of excitement? All of this kind of stuff. What does this feeling mean? How do I process it? How do I talk about it? All of these things you don't get taught as a kid, unless you've got really, parents who are really open and stuff. But my mum didn't, and she was just trying her best as well. My mum didn't teach us that.
Yeah, like they haven't been taught. They haven't been taught either. Like,
yeah, I mean, my mum did an amazing job. Like she showed strength all the time, and her idea of strength was like, just crack on, and that's a good strategy to a certain extent. But I feel eventually you have to. It's really important to learn to talk openly about your vulnerabilities and what you're going through. And maybe there's a bit of time that's needed to develop the language to be able to do that.
It's funny, mate, when you were saying that, I think my best explanation of how I'm feeling is I'm fucked. If it's not right, that's just the, it's a box that kind of just is everything.
What does that mean? Yeah.
Yeah. And it does, like, and then you try and articulate it, and then it's very difficult, mate. I'm absolutely agreeing. So I just put it in that box. I'm like, yeah, I'm fucked and I need to figure this out. But it's so difficult. Even and when you were saying it as well, I'm thinking, like, I came off a call last night and, Holly was like, are you okay? And I'm like, no, I'm not. And she's like, and if I quickly reflect on it, within 5 minutes, I'm disappointed, angry, sad, gutted, and I'm trying to get all these things out. But really,
there's like 20 things going on at once. Yeah. And if somebody just uses one word, like fucked,
yeah,
what does that mean? You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
The classic in the UK is like, you grew up in the UK, so when you say, how are you in the UK? Somebody will reply, not bad.
Yeah.
It's almost just like a passing of the question. In Germany, I lived in Germany for 2 years, and I had a German girlfriend for 6 years. And it was so funny because when she came to the UK, somebody would ask her, how are you? And that's a very literal question in Germany. So she would give this elaborate answer about how she was, which is hilarious because we almost like pass that question. It's a really important question, and we pass it in the UK as if it's nothing. And that language as well, when you really dissect not bad, it's so negative. Yeah. Like I'm not bad. Yeah. So the whole point of Talk Club is that instead of asking how are you, we ask how are you out of 10. Wow. And that really stops people to think, especially men as well, who are rational, logical human beings, like who love numbers and stuff like that. Yeah. Actually, how am I out of 10? It's if you say 6 to me, or 5 or 4, then I'll be like, why are you a 4? Like, what's going on for you at this moment in time? And it opens room for a larger conversation to happen.
Yeah, that's
fantastic.
One that I like to use for myself primarily, and a lot of people that I coach, and I actually have spoken about it on the show. I'm like, what are you excited about today? Because that then gives it a little bit more, because it's easy, mate. And it's the way we've been trained. You ask me, how's it going? Yeah, not bad. And then it's almost like we should say that, and then we can have a conversation. Whereas actually that first part of like, how are you doing? And like you say, out of 10, or what are you actually excited about today? Or, what are you actually feeling? Imagine if you walked into a room and I go, hey, Dan, what are you feeling? You'd be like, what the fuck? Well, you wouldn't, because you're aware of it. But generally people would be, no, it's also, and maybe you've got some thoughts on this, mate. It's so new. And we touched on this a few minutes ago, but it's so new to everyone that's why it feels maybe a bit sort of like, whoa, what are you talking about? So it just needs the time that we spoke about, right?
I think it's, and I think it was so autopilot as well. Like you said, that how are you is almost like a traditional question to open a conversation. So as soon as you add a different question into the mix, how are you out of 10? what's making you excited today? That stumps people. It's like, whoa, I didn't expect that. And then it encourages people to think. Whereas the how are you question doesn't encourage people to think.
No.
I autopilot response and say, I'm not bad. How's it going for you? I actually wouldn't say I'm not bad, because I consciously try to catch that one now, because I don't like it. Like I think it's inherently quite negative response. Yeah. I'm really good today, or something like that. But even that is just you don't normally elaborate on much more than like, I'm really good. We'll move on and we'll talk about what we're here to talk about or whatever. So I think these questions like, how are you out of 10? And what makes you excited, allows people to actually talk about what's going on for them.
One good sort of a good game that people can play, which is a little bit evil, mate, and you might not like this, so I'll own it. Is if someone says to you, and you know that they're just going to move on, how are you doing? Just say pretty shit, and then see what happens. They'll just go, okay, so, and then a lot of the time. Yeah, especially if you say it a little bit quietly and under your breath, because if you are a little bit shit or you are struggling, you're probably not going to go, hey mate, yeah, I'm really struggling today. You're not going to be very outward and energetic of it, because you're in a bit of a frumpy mood. Your shoulders are rolled in. Body language is not that great. So you'll generally just say, yeah, I'm actually not that great. But then so you can play games with people on it. It's a little bit, it's probably not the best way to go about it, and that's why I'm not involved in talk club or anything like that, mate. But I think just one just on that, like there's nothing more beautiful than just being honest. If you're not feeling great, experiment just saying that and see how people sit with it. A lot of people won't know how to react, because they're not used to that, because it's a question to start a conversation in the UK. How are you? I'm not bad. Let's move on. But if you said, if you asked me, how are you? And I'm actually going through some stuff. I'm not feeling great today. There will be a lot of people who will recognize that and inquire and listen and stop. But there'll be people who don't know how to deal with it. But I just try to go around being honest now. I probably wasn't in the past. If I was feeling shit, and you asked me that question, I'd just say not bad, and we'd skip it and move on. I think especially in British culture, we have a hard time talking about what we're truly feeling. Yeah. I think we've got this, I don't know if you'd agree or whatever, maybe in Australia, that we don't want to put our burdens on other people. And that's like, we don't, like, my problems are my problems, and why would I want to put them on you kind of situation. And I think that's quite destructive, because actually when you share what you're going through, you realize that John, your mate, is actually going through something a bit similar or whatever. And by you being vulnerable and opening up and sharing what you're going through, John's like, actually, I can actually speak to Dan about these things, rather than having our superficial conversations about football and music or whatever, and all of this crappy chat that's going on all the time, and have some serious conversations about the deeper stuff. Because I know now from all of the conversations that I've had in psychotherapy settings that people are struggling. Like, nobody is immune, and we're all human, having this experience with different levels of suffering. You just, like, if we, like, I'm on a street of 100 houses. If those houses were open doors and you could just walk in and witness what was going on, you would walk home at night and be like, wow, I'm not alone. Because like, there's everything that you can imagine is going on in this street at this moment in time. There's, people are struggling with money, there's divorces, there's all kinds of, sadness and happiness and excitement happening on this street right now of 100 houses or whatever. And I think just normal, we don't get that perspective, because we don't
invite ourselves to have these honest and open conversations with strangers. And I think if we did that more, then we'd realize actually what I'm experiencing is quite normal.
Amazing, mate. What a beautiful way to wrap up an amazing conversation. I appreciate everything you've shared. I appreciate your vulnerability, mate. I know some of those things are, for a lot of people, are not easy to talk about. And you almost, I don't know if it's right to say, but you talk about them with such inspiration and such passion. And you've given me a lot of hope, and I'm sure you'll give a lot of other people hope. So Dan, I appreciate you, and mate, we'll stay in touch. That's for sure. We'll have to have another conversation. I think this is probably the start, but the next one we have, mate, is definitely going to have to be when we're running. I think that's I have the DJI mics that you can just clip on, right? And I also have a sound engineer who can make the sound good even when it's windy, but I've not yet done a running podcast. But I think that, like, because that's a real conversation, right? You know, we can be here on Zoom and it's quite formal, and, you know, we're recording, we've got time limit. When you go out running, and it's true what you said, mate. I love to just, meeting in coffee shops is quite old school. Meeting, going for a walk or going for a run, and actually just having a mic there would be, and I think you and I should do that, mate. So next time I'm in the UK, we should too.
I think that's how you access men as well, through movement and nature. Like a stale kind of room doesn't cut it. So I think you're onto something there. Maybe all of your podcasts should be on a mountain.
I just struggle with the video version, mate. I've been running with my arm out here with the camera trying to get it, but we'll figure something out. Dan, you're an absolute legend, mate.
Brilliant.
I really do appreciate it. And mate, thank you. Honestly, that was absolutely brilliant. Really cool.
Thank you for having me as well. And when you're over in England, let's go for a run.
Let's go for a run. Mate, thanks a lot.